Welcome to NorCal Slot Car Scene. One of the most popular classes of racing in Northern California is for slotted Group C cars. The two cars I currently race are a Lancia LC2 and a Porsche 956. This video will go through a complete start-to-finish build process of my latest acquisition, a Toyota JTK 63C. I chose the Toyota because it has a slightly longer guide-to-rear axle distance than that of the Porsche 956, which is my current race car. Now it's time to take off the body and get started with the build. Here I've laid out most of the parts that we're going to use in this build. To start, pull off the entire front axle assembly. Those little spacers that are in there that you see in the front, don't worry about them because we're going to replace them later. The first thing I do is use super glue to reinforce all the body parts that could come off during racing action. Next, take off the rear tires and attach the chassis to the body, but don't screw it in. We're looking to see if the body is free for movement. I'm really looking for front to back movement, and in some cases you may have to do some cutting, trimming, or filing to make sure you get the proper movement. Now it's time to work on the front wheel, tire, and axle assembly. For the front tires, I've replaced the stock tires with slotted low-profile zero-grip rubber. The low-profile front tires allow you to maximize the front track width without any body interference. It also allows the axle to sit lower in the chassis. A lower center of gravity usually means better handling. If you haven't already, take out the plastic axle carriers that come in the kit and replace them with 4 set screws. 2 are attached to the bottom of the chassis and 2 are attached to the top of the chassis. This will allow us a much easier way to set the ride height of the front end. I'm replacing the stock guide with a screw-in guide. I also replaced the stock braid with NSR Super Racing braid. Use a sharp pair of scissors to get a nice clean cut on the braid. This will make it much easier to insert in the new guide. It's difficult to see in this video, but the NSR braid is much softer than the stock braid, which makes for a better handling car. Now check the front ride height of the chassis. If necessary, add spacers to get the desired ride height of about 30 thousandths of an inch. Lubricate the shaft of the guide and install the screw. Make sure the guide is nice and free and returns to center. This will make it much easier to corner marshal. Now remove the magnet from the car. We're replacing the magnet with the tungsten ballast that Slot-it makes in the same shape of the magnet. I replaced the stock screws with Slotting Plus screws. The finer thread will make it easier to adjust the pod when we're doing our track test. I adjust the screws in the front of the pod so there's very little movement, but the pod is free to move forward and backward. In the rear, I start with quite a bit of movement. Even slight motor movement can detract from the handling of the car, so use 2 2mm screws to bolt the motor to the motor pod. Finally, I use a piece of electrical tape to limit the movement of the motor pod. The most important part of any slot car build is the preparation of the rear tires. For the Group C car, I used NSR Super Grips. After they were glued and trued, I put them in my tire machine and ran them in NSR oil for 6 hours. Before we put the car on the track, I lubricate the rear axle bushings, the rear gear, and the contact points on the front axle. Now it's time to reinstall the body and get ready for racing. So, did all these modifications work? Well, in the first race, we were on the podium, but not on the top step. However, when we looked at the lap times from the race, the Toyota turned the fast lap in every lane. So I would say the car is definitely a success. Thanks for watching. This is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene.